Now, while Africa is mainly known for its natural resources, stock markets are drivers and contributors to growth on the continent. Over the past 15 years, Africa's average GDP growth has been above 4% every year, with various sectors driving this growth. If you'd like to partake in Africa's growth, this discussion is meant for investors who need exposure to some African markets. Maurice Madiba, the Managing Director at Cloud Atlas, joins us in studio to give us a bit more info. Nice to have you in studio. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
It's such an important conversation to have because, you know, when it comes to investing in other African countries, a lot of people get nervous and think, oh, wow, where do I go? Like, where should I put my money? So, I mean, should people be nervous?
At the particular moment, there's a lot of risks investors need to look out for. One of those is when it comes down to currencies, because Africa has a lot of currencies, it's not just one. But there is, when you do have a lot of choice in terms of sectors, in terms of countries, it can make investors a little bit nervous, which is why having a product like a basket of shares through an ETF is one of the best ways to get exposure to the African continent.
Yeah. So that in other words, when we talk about a basket of shares, we're talking about perhaps the stock pick of some of the best shares in the African countries all in one basket that you're investing in.
That's right. That's correct. So if you have if you think of going shopping as an example, you are spoiled for choice in terms of things you can buy. But if you now wrap that up into one basket, you do get everything at one go. So you don't have to necessarily worry in this basket about what is happening in Nigeria, what is happening in Botswana. You get exposure to all of these markets through one execution or at one go.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like, I mean, just to put it to, trying to educate people. So it's kind of like picking, one of our buying into the top 40.
That's right.
In South Africa.
Yeah.
You're buying into the top 40 shares, but you're not buying individually. You're buying one share that is kind of got all of them in.
That's right.
Yeah, which is a good way to go.
Yeah.
There's one particular conversation we're going to be looking at, and that's the exchange traded fund. I mean, I don't think many people understand what that is. Will you tell us a bit more about that?
So if you are familiar with unit trusts, the likes of Old Mutual has a lot, Allan Gray has a lot as well. It's the same concept. The difference is that this is now traded on the exchange. So you can easily access it if you've got access to trading any shares on the market. A lot of people don't have access or know how to access the JSE, but an exchange-traded fund would be something you can access directly on the JSE. And so what you would need to do is to open a trading account, and then you can buy things like ETF, buy things like shares on the market.
Yeah. Let's look at some of the African countries and those that are doing exceptionally well. But if you have to highlight some that you'd say, you know, this country, watch out for them. I mean, it's a good investment.
Yeah. The first one that comes to mind is Kenya.
Yeah.
So around East Africa, it's Kenya. And if I bring it back to South Africa, you see there's a lot of property development in South Africa. I think our real estate is valued at about 1.3 trillion rand. So in Kenya, real estate is also doing exceptionally well. There's a lot of infrastructure development. Retail is doing well. And the IMF forecasts that Kenya is going to grow at about 6%, close to 6% this year. So around the world, if you think we were revised, our GDP growth is probably going to be 1 basis point or 1 basis point, 0.1%.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
10 basis
what
points.
are they doing right? I mean, it's insane in this current environment. I mean, we can't even imagine something like that because it's quite incredible when you think about Kenya. Their technology sector is doing exceptionally well. When you look at their, doesn't matter what it is, markets, resources, you name it. What are they doing right?
What they are doing, the government is focusing on services for the consumer. In South Africa, we're pretty privileged in that consumers already have access to a lot of products. But in the rest of Africa, it's not quite the case. So when it comes to markets like Kenya, they're using technology to now connect consumers to products. And that's what's driving a lot of their growth. They also are moving away from resources. A lot of African countries are known for trying to be extractive and be in mining, but they're moving into more service-based economies. So looking after the consumer, making sure the consumer has access to goods, that's what's really going to drive growth in Africa and in a lot of other African markets.
Yeah. I just want to quickly, before we wrap up, talk about Nigeria as well, because, you know, everybody talks about Nigeria and the investment there, and yet we saw Dangote, Africa's richest man, reported to have lost about $4 billion last week. What happened there?
Yeah, it was all in one day.
Sure, I cannot even imagine that.
Yeah. One day, the stock market is a lot of news and information feeds the price of stocks in the market. So what happened in Nigeria is the currency weakened in one day. It lost about 40%. And as a result, when you convert their net asset value or their wealth into dollar terms, you're converting at a much lower rate. So it's the equivalent of the rand dropping, say, to about 18 or so in one day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. I mean, I just think that's just crazy. $4 billion in a day to lose that. Well, that just shows you he's got a lot to go around, obviously.
Yeah.
It didn't dent him too much.
True.
Listen, it's so interesting. I'd love to get you back into studio to talk a little bit more about this, but thanks so much for coming in and touching on it. So, get hold of it. I mean, I can see your details are all over there. Investing in Africa, if it's something you're interested in, get hold of Cloud Atlas, and hopefully they can advise you more. Thanks for talking to us here on the program. Maurice Madiba, who's the Managing Director at Cloud Atlas. All right, let's take a break here on the program.